For as the light of the morning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, and covereth the whole earth, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God, and the days will come that you shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and it shall be in his own time, and in his own way, and according to his own will. This is unveiling Jesus Christ.
Welcome to this video log about the ancient city of Ephesus. I'm John Cassinat, and I'll be your tour guide on our visit to that part of the ancient city that is shown here in this aerial photograph that I borrowed from a tourist book that I purchased. Our interest in the ancient city lies in the fact that Ephesus was the first of the 7 cities that John wrote to in the book of Revelation in chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. So let's begin with the layout of the ancient city using the aerial map. Our tour begins at the top of the city called the acropolis, and then we're going to work our way down, going to the north and to the west. As we come in from the south and east at the high point, they're identified as item number 1. We're on the acropolis of Lysimachus. Now, Lysimachus was a general of Alexander the Great, and he's the guy that moved the city to this location in the 4th century BC. Now, if you looked at my most recent video log, I did an overview of the history of Ephesus where I talked about Lysimachus in some detail, so I'm not going to spend any time doing it again, so you can go back and listen to that if you have an interest in the history. Now, items 2 shown on this aerial map of the Acropolis include things like the bath of Varius, the basilica, the Odeon, the government agora, the Prytaneion, and the cisterns. And we'll be talking about all those things when we get to the point of actually going through some of the photographs and videos that I've taken. Items 8 through 10 shown on this aerial map are generally referred to as Domitian Square. Now, Domitian was the emperor of the Roman Empire at the time that John was banished to the island of Patmos, and that occurred in roughly 94 to 96 AD, and Domitian's the guy that did that, and so he has a pretty significant presence here in the city with some of the archaeological ruins, including the Domitian Temple and the Domitian Fountain. There's also other items that we'll be looking at in this area called the Memnius Gate and the Pollio Fountain. After that, we're going to head down on Curetes Street, which are shown as items 11 through 18 on the aerial map. And here we're going to see some temples of various kinds, a public bathhouse, a rich housing area, a brothel, and of all things, really important is the public latrine. So those are all things that we're going to be looking at. And so let's get this tour rolling by first looking at a video on top of the Acropolis of Lysimachus. You're now looking at the Prytaneion on the Acropolis, and as we pan from left to right, you'll see kind of an open area here. This was a gathering place for the people. There were structures, but it was not a covered area. As we pan around to the right, you're going to first see through the trees the Odeon, and then we'll see the basilica, and right next to that we're going to end up at the bath of Varius. Here are all 3 of the structures I just mentioned shown with the red arrows, and we're going to talk about each of them beginning with the bath of Varius. This structure was originally built during the 2nd century AD with several restorations after that, which means it was not here when John lived in Ephesus. It was named after Flavius Domitianus, a famous teacher and philosopher who contributed to its construction. The structure is known for its unique appearance from multiple renovations, including one of a wealthy Christian woman named Scholastica from the 4th century. It was a very sophisticated structure that had running water and some of the pipes you can see here from the excavations. The bathhouses were places for both socializing as well as bathing in the ancient Roman world. Next to the Varius bath is the basilica at Ephesus. It suggests they're organizing everything alphabetically in Ephesus. But at any rate, in Roman architecture, a basilica was a large public building with multiple functions. It was typically built alongside the town's forum, also known as the agora. It's a typical design of a rectangular building with a central nave and aisles on the sides. Courts were held as well as other official and public gatherings in a building like this. The Latin word basilica derives from the ancient Greek word called stoa. So whether it's a basilica or a stoa, they both describe any large covered hall, and that's regardless of whether it was for domestic, commercial, military, religious, or government purposes. The first basilica was constructed in 184 BC in the Roman Forum in Rome. And then Constantine the Great constructed these monumental Christian basilicas starting in the 4th century. And that's the point in time when basilicas really became more associated with Christian places of worship, including especially the Roman Catholic Church. And the most famous of these, of course, is St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The next building is the Odeon or Bouleterion, also known as kind of the little theater. It was next to the basilica in the shape of a bowl of a theater. It was a roof theater built around 100 to 150 AD, and so it's quite possible that after John returned from his banishment on the island of Patmos, he may have seen this under construction or may have seen it at some point. It's an auditorium and meeting place of the Senate and a concert hall. It would be a small theater for plays and concerts. These would be pretty much considered off-Broadway because the much larger theater for 25,000 was down the road a ways. This one would seat about 1,500 people. It had 22 stairs in the theater, and the upper part was decorated with red granite pillars in the Corinthian style. Common citizens could come here and discuss daily problems. It's located next to the Temple of Apollo that would be in front of the theater. It's called the Bouleterion as the place of council meetings, and that's because in Latin the word council comes from the root word boule or boule, hence the Bouleterion. The next building is the state or government agora. It's a large covered courtyard built on a square plan. So in this photo you can see kind of to the north or to the right was the Odeon Basilica. To the south was the Prytaneion that we'll be talking about in just a minute. In the middle of the agora there were two temples to Egyptian gods. The first was to the Egyptian god Isis. This was destroyed under the reign of Augustus, and he was angry because of the affair that Mark Antony had with Cleopatra, and so he tore down the god Isis and replaced it with a statue called Polyphema. The second Egyptian god in the agora was the Egyptian god Serapis. And so I'm going to show you what one artist's rendering has of what this building actually looked like. So you have an overlay over the top of the pillars that you're looking at to show the image of the building, and then going back again you can see the pillars as they exist today, just to give you some sense of what in theory the building would have looked like. Looking from the same vantage point, if you go south beyond the agora, you'll see the Prytaneion and also cisterns on the south side. The Prytaneion was essentially the seat of the executive and government in ancient Greece. So this word describes any range of ancient structures where officials met. It's normally found in the center of the city, near or at the agora, and it's regarded as kind of the religious and political center of the community and the nucleus of all government. It was essentially the official, quote-unquote, home of the whole people. So high and wealthy people would come and make ritual offerings in this location. It also contained the perpetual flame burned night and day, representing the hearth of every Ephesian. It was a building that was dedicated to the goddess Hestia, who is the goddess of family. In this next photo, we see the cisterns for the city of Ephesus. The water for this city was brought in from natural sources via aqueducts, and it came in here at the top of the acropolis where these cisterns are located, because the whole plumbing system in Ephesus operated on gravity flow of the water. So you had to have the cisterns at the high point of the city. Ephesus had one of the most advanced aqueduct systems in the ancient world. There were at least 6 different aqueducts of various sizes that supplied water in different areas of the cities, and these aqueducts fed a number of water mills, including a sawmill for marble. And so once the water came into the cistern near the top of the acropolis, it went into the terracotta pipes that you're seeing and have seen before, such that virtually every building in the city of Ephesus had running water. We're now going to leave the Lysimachus Acropolis going east on the column street that you see in the middle of this photograph. When we get to kind of the bottom of it, we're going to take a left-hand turn and go into the Domitian Square. The Temple of Domitian is located, or was located, on that grassy flat area in the upper right portion of the photograph. So without further ado, we're going to take a little video walk down that column street, and then we'll take a left-hand turn as we get toward the bottom of it. Here you see the columns, and on the left side you see that wall that's like a retaining wall that supports the terrace where the Prytaneion stood. Here we are at the intersection of this street with the Domitian Square. The structure we're looking at here is called the Memnius Gateway, and it's right at this intersection between several different streets. As we look toward the left, going up the street, we'll be able to see the Temple of Domitian that I showed you a moment ago in that other photograph, and there you see it. Coming to the left, that's the Fountain of Domitian, and next to that is the Fountain of Pollio. Now this image you're looking at here, some believe that was a hospital structure, although that's somewhat in question. Next to the so-called hospital was the Pollio fountain that was decorated with a group of statues called Polyphema. The inscription on the fountain indicates that it was erected in 97 AD to honor Sextilius Pollio, who was the builder of the aqueduct that carried water to all the fountains in the city. The fountain was also his tomb that was erected by his stepson, located on land that had been provided by the city for that purpose. The whole city commemorated his aqueduct achievements. Next to the Pollio fountain is the Domitian fountain. The arch that you're looking at is about 18 feet tall. It was constructed in about 92 or 93 AD, which means it was here before John was banished to the island of Patmos by the Emperor Domitian. This grand apse opened into the Domitian Square, as you saw in the video, and it also was home to a group of statues that were incorporated into the niche behind the arch, which showed the adventures of Odysseus and Polyphemus. I'm now showing you an artist's rendering of what they think the Temple of Domitian looked like that sits atop this terrace. If you look in the next photograph that's actually on one of the boards there in Ephesus, you can see how that structure sat on top of this terrace, and the terrace had these big columns that supported it. The Temple of Domitian was dedicated to the imperial cult of the Flavian dynasty, which included Nero, his son Vespasian, his son Titus, and then Domitian, who was the brother of Titus. The temple was built between 89 and 90 AD under the reign of Domitian, and this of course is the same guy who exiled John to the island of Patmos. So this temple stood in Ephesus when John was living there. It's the first structure in Ephesus known to have been dedicated to an emperor, and such temples are called neokoros. And the temple was surrounded by these columns that I've already shown you in an 8 by 13 pattern with 6 steps leading up to the temple itself. The temple was about 75 feet by 100 feet and erected on the terrace, as we've kind of already discussed. The temple stood between 82 and 391 AD, but after Christianity became the state religion under Constantine and others that followed him. Paganism was eventually outlawed and the temple was torn down to its foundation. So keep in mind also that Domitian was a great persecutor of the Christians. So when the Christians came into power in the time of Constantine, they were more than happy to tear his temple down. And in fact, after Domitian's assassination in 96 AD, his name was cursed, and many of the inscriptions bearing his name were removed. And so this temple was part of the fallout of Domitian's reign. Going back north from the Temple of Domitian, we come to the gateway of Memnius that stands at the intersection of that road coming off the Acropolis, Domitian Square, and then Curetes Street that we'll go down in a moment. The gateway was constructed in the 1st century AD during the reign of Augustus by a guy by the name of Memnius, who was the grandson or nephew of Sulla, a Roman general and statesman. This commemorates Sulla's victory in the Mithriatic Wars that I discussed in my last vlog. Now, the design of this structure consists of 4 sides, and a fountain was added in the northwest side during the 4th century AD. It also includes figures of the father and grandfather of Memnius that are shown as part of the monument today. We do have a artist rendering of what this structure might have looked like, which I'm showing you right now, and then if you then replace back the columns, you get a sense of potentially what it looked like. We're now going to take a stroll down Curetes Street, which is named after a religious brotherhood anciently, so the street had sacred significance. Once a year there was a religious procession that went from the Prytaneion at the top of the Acropolis to a town named Odeon, which is now Arvia, in a coastal city near Curetes. The procession celebrated the birth of the goddess Artemis, who's also Diana. The main boulevard is about 600 feet long, leading from the Memnius Gate to the Celsius Library, and over this distance it drops about 60 feet in elevation. There was also a sewer channel running beneath the paved street, and it had a column street with inscriptions at the bases of all these columns describing the good deeds of citizens and benefactors. It was also bordered by a stoa with a wooden roof. There were covered porticos, which are porches for shops, tradesmen, and innkeepers. And so we're going to be traveling down this street and stopping and seeing various buildings as we go along. Our first stop on Curetes Street is the Fountain of Trajan, located on our right-hand side. An inscription indicates that it was dedicated to Emperor Trajan, who reigned between 98 and 117 AD. He was generally tolerant of Christians during his reign, primarily with a kind of a don't ask, don't tell policy. The fountain was donated to his honor sometime between 102 and 114 AD. The original height of this was a 2-story structure, about 28 feet. The building surrounded a fountain on 3 sides, and Trajan's statue was in the middle of the alcove. A globe was under his feet where the water entered the fountain. We have a artist rendering of what this may have looked like that you're seeing here on the screen right now. The terrace houses are located on the opposite side of the street from the Fountain of Trajan. These ruins of houses date back to the 1st century BC. In these residential units, the rooms are kind of centered around a courtyard with surrounding columns. The photographs kind of illustrate the interior of the houses that have been excavated and restored. They're now located under this large permanent canopy to help with their preservation. The homes you're looking at here would have been for wealthy families, and there was definitely a social structure in the city, including where people lived based on their wealth and status. The poor people had to live outside the city, but this was the place where the rich folk were able to hang out. We next encounter the Scholastica Bath, located on the opposite side of the street from the homes of the rich and famous, and also adjacent to and east of the Temple of Hadrian. The baths were restored in about 400 AD by a rich woman by the name of Christiane Scholastica. It's a classic Roman design. The entire building would have been covered with a large vaulted ceiling. There was a changing room, and as you first go into it, the first room that you encounter is the cold section known as the frigidarium. If you've ever wondered where the name Frigidaire comes from, guess what? Now you know. It's Latin. So the statue of Scholastica was located in this first room together with a large elliptical pool of cold water. It was the custom after people went into the bath, they would take a nice, cool, refreshing bath before leaving. The building also had a warm section known as the tepidarium, and finally a hot section known as the caldarium. This was the hot room with the sauna and a steam bath and stuff like that. And you can look at the images, pipes running everywhere in the floor and in the walls that were bringing in hot air and hot water that would come from these gigantic furnaces. And the steam was generated with bellows that had to be operated by slaves who would keep the fire and water and everything going. When the water was used up in the bathhouse, it would then run down into the canals underneath the floor into the adjacent public latrine that we're going to see here in just a moment. So they were very efficient in their use of the water. They were very ecologically friendly people. We next come to the Temple of Hadrian, who was the emperor who reigned in the Roman Empire from 117 to 138 AD. The reliefs over the door lintels depict the Ephesian foundation myth. You might remember I talked about this in my history that I did of Ephesus, about a guy named Androclos who searched for a place to establish a new Greek settlement based on directions he'd gotten from the oracle at Delphi. The sculptures in this temple tell that story. Hadrian came to Ephesus in 128 AD and gave back to the city the name of Neocore, which means that it is a city dedicated to a deity or a place of imperial worship, that is, emperor worship. This title was first given to Ephesus when the temple was dedicated to Domitian, but as I mentioned before, that name was lost or rescinded after Domitian's death because everybody disliked him. It's kind of a kind way of putting it. So to regain the honor of being a Neocore, the Ephesians built a large temple east of the city called Olympian, and this temple was ultimately destroyed during the Byzantine era after the 4th century. So as far as this temple to Hadrian, it was built with a facade that had 4 columns with 2 square columns at either side, and the portico were surmounted by these classical motifs as I've described before about the Ephesian foundation myth. In the center of it was the head of Tishe, or Tish, the goddess of fortune, who was also a symbol of the city. And both sides of the door had these friezes of Androclos killing the wild boar that I talked about before. The Temple of Hadrian was also dedicated to Artemis and to the people of Ephesus, trying to get more bang for your buck, so we'll dedicate it to a whole bunch of people. Now there are these pedestals in front of the temple that were bases for statues of emperors between 293 and 305 AD. They were incorporated into the temple when it was restored in the 4th century, and even though we have the bases with the inscriptions on them, the statues have never been found. We do have an artist rendering of what they think this temple might have looked like, and I'm showing you that here on the screen, so anyway, that might be what it looked like. No tour would be complete without a stop at the public latrine, so here we are. You'll notice as we come into this particular structure that you've got plenty of seating with the channels of running water that go underneath the seats to remove the waste from the latrine. The water is coming from the bathhouse, as I mentioned before. There's lots of seating, so you don't need to be shy. This is no place for shy bladders. We also have the pillars that you can see in the area to hold up the roof, and given the number of seating that's available in this, it suggests that there was a fairly large population in Ephesus, and maybe it was even possible that the women didn't have to stand in line like they do today. Those were definitely the good old days. The next building and last building that I'm going to talk about in this video log segment is the love house, or the brothel, that is located next to the latrine. Even though it's next to the latrine, it's actually accessible from a street called the Marble Road that you can see in this first image, but also a better picture of it is in this second image that I'm showing you. It's a beautiful street, really. In the next image, you see this footprint in the ground that is a left foot. This is actually a signboard to tell people where the brothel was located. So it's like a kind of these yellow signs that we use on the highways today. They have this picture of a deer, looks kind of like it's jumping, and it tells people, hey, there could be deer in the area, so watch out. The left foot in the street is indicating that up here on the left, because it's the left foot and it's next to a heart that's not really too clearly visible in the image, but it's basically saying with the left foot up on the left, you're going to get some love up ahead. I didn't know what this was at the time that I took the picture. I just saw this metal railing around. I said, that must be important. So I took a picture of it. Apparently it was back in the olden days. The entrance to the brothel is located in a nice residential area here on the left. And so to get to the brothel, you actually go past this nice residence and go into the brothel rooms that are located back behind, that would then be close to the public latrine that we were talking about before. We're at about the midpoint of everything I wanted to show you on this guided tour, so I'm going to break this video down into two parts and leave you with a couple scenes to coming attractions in the next segment. So thanks for listening, watching, and subscribing, and I'll see you next time.